Hey, Tati here, and welcome to Calmly Coping. I'm here with Morgan Beard, who is a creative life coach, and I'm so excited to have you here, Morgan. Can you let us know more about yourself?
Absolutely. So I call myself a creative life coach because I've always identified as an artist. I've always been an artist my entire life. I've dabbled in pretty much every medium that there is. And I've also been a client of therapy myself since like the end of high school. And I'm 31 now. And so I went into the independent film industry initially after college. And then I realized that I wanted to help people. I wanted to be in their most intimate moments, and because that's what I kind of lived and breathed as someone who struggled with depression and anxiety. And I always wanted to get to just like the bottom of everything. But I wanted to combine that with my creativity and my identity as an artist. So I ended up going to graduate school to get a degree in art therapy. So I have my master's in art therapy, and I was doing that, and then I burnt out in my first job after grad school. I was working at a nursing home. I was living in New York at the time, and I didn't know what to do after that. I was like, oh my God, I thought I was going to be an art therapist for the rest of my life. Like, I thought this was it. I ended up that experience of burning out and hitting my own next kind of rock bottom as far as my own mental health was enough of a kick in the butt to get me to move to Los Angeles, where I felt like I had a chance. I moved to Los Angeles and I thought, let me just try to go somewhere where I think I'm going to be happy and not make my career like the entire thing that defines me for once in my life, and try to actually just be happy. And when I got here, I ended up getting a job assisting a business coach for creative female entrepreneurs. And I had no exposure to the coaching industry at that point, but really liked what I learned from her just personally about mindset stuff. And she specifically dealt with spirituality and money mindset. And especially with women, we have to overcome a lot from living in this patriarchal society to kind of reclaim our spiritual wealth, our financial wealth, and everything in between. And that just blew my mind all the way open, and was like, wow, I want to use the personal skills that I've developed, as well as some of the creative tools that I gained as an art therapist, in order to help people in this very goal-focused, proactive kind of way, but still supporting them emotionally, because so much that's what people need, is a relationship where they can feel emotionally supported, heard, seen, felt, all that stuff. So in the last 3 years since I started doing that, I've kind of found this niche, or this title of creative life coach, because it adds back in that element of the way that I use creativity as a tool with my clients. And a lot of my clients are creative people, in order to help them deal with stress, in order to help them feel that they have mastery over their lives and their situations, and to gain confidence and self-esteem, to see that not only can they survive, but they can thrive and channel their gifts into something really special, and really design whatever they want their lives to be. So long story long, that's that's a little bit more about me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that's great how you combined your personal experience with your mental health struggles, along with your creativity and the training that you got as an art therapist, to become like this creative life coach. And that's actually a term that I hadn't heard of before, but I think that sounds really interesting. That like combination of integrating creativity into, caring for your mental health, personal development, because, I think those fields tend to be focused more on, I guess, like the mental, like talking things through, and not necessarily like doing and being creative.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've always been a huge proponent of talk therapy. I mean, I think talk therapy, medication, these things that I underwent in my treatment saved my life. So I would never, speak a bad word about it, except sometimes I think it doesn't go all the way, like you said, to actually helping someone practice by doing it themselves and experiencing it. And so much of what I've realized, because I've also done a lot of sort of spiritual work and worked with different healers and used my own different healing modalities. But like we have all these things inside of us, and depression is such an internalized kind of presentation. And then anxiety, some people experience it primarily physically, but I think a lot of us experience it as like, our wheels are spinning internally endlessly. And we have to reverse that flow and start expressing things and getting things out of us so that we can really, like, first of all, just the alchemy of transmuting those emotions into something other than just thoughts stewing around our brain, but also once they're out into like a journal entry or an artistic product or something, you can then really look at that material and learn so much about yourself, and also gain a reflective distance where you can have a more objective perspective on what's going on with you, rather than just being like in the meat of it all the time, like you're in the washing machine, like a sock.
Yeah, I like that comparison. It's like kind of just like spinning around over and over again with nowhere to go.
Exactly. I've never used that before, but I'm going to start because I think it's really appropriate.
So how do you help people to integrate creativity into this work?
Yeah. So like I said, well, actually, I take that back. I was going to reiterate that a lot of my clients are already creatives. But I think that one of the most important things that I can say is that we all have creative energy that we want to express, whether we've nurtured it in ourselves or whether it was nurtured in us or not. And so I think a lot of people are kind of thwarted initially by this idea of like, well, I'm not an artist. I heard that over and over and over again in all these different settings as an art therapist. Like, well, I can't paint. I can't this. I can't that. And it's like we become adults and we cement ourselves into this framework of like, this is who I am and this is who I'm not. And it's very vulnerable to explore a whole new modality, especially something as kind of raw as art. But art is so potent because it's this mirror that shows us our insides. And so that's something that's not at all unique to my practice. If you take out a piece of paper right now and you start drawing with a pen, you're going to see something about yourself. But what I do is the first step, I think, is empowering the person to actually do it. A lot of people aren't going to take out a blank piece of paper and doodle because they're not confident in that as a way of getting to know themselves, or they're afraid of what the product might look like. So a lot of it is just empowering people to kind of cross that threshold into seeing themselves as a creator. And that's a huge shift that is demonstrative of the work itself, where it's like just getting people to see that they're not at the mercy of all these things happening to them in life, but that they can pick up the pen, so to speak. But then the other piece, of course, is like, okay, so I made this artistic output. Now, like, what is this? What does this mean? And so once you start to get a sense of who am I as an artist, what are the kinds of things that I gravitate towards expressing, then you can really start to kind of unwind the mystery of what is happening subconsciously in my body. Because we have these physical bodies and we have these emotional bodies that just absorb and absorb and absorb from birth. And, some people would say even before birth in different lives, we have these things that are stored in us, and we have to start to decode them in order to know what's going on inside of me. What do I really want in life? And then how can I actually start to achieve that? And then that's where it gets very coachy, because it's like, all right, once you know what you want, then you can say, all right, what's step one? What are the 3 parts I need to do to accomplish step 1? What's step 2? But when you're at the starting line and you've just got a mess of emotions that you're sitting in, you can't be like, all right, well, I'm going to calmly identify all the steps from where I am to where I want to go. So the creativity is this amazing vehicle for empowerment and also self-discovery.
Mm. Yeah, and I love how you start with that piece of empowerment, because I think that's true, that a lot of people feel like insecure about expressing themselves through art, and there's a lot of judgment that can come up. And, you know, I think especially for my listeners, maybe that comes from a place of like always feeling like they need to be in control of what's happening, because there's so much uncertainty and maybe like what that creative expression might look like or be like, or is it good enough?
Yeah.
Do you come across that a lot?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it's not to say that I've 100% graduated from my own insecurity and self-judgment, because absolutely not. You know, it's in there. It's been baked in from a young age. And I think that like 90% of people have a story where it's like they went to art class as a kid and the art teacher said something ridiculous to them that gave them a complex for the rest of their life about who they are as an artist, that they can't do it or this or that they can't draw a circle, you know. Like we take in all these messages and these judgments, and they become like the self-criticism narrative that we carry around. And yeah, God forbid we expose that vulnerability and we show that lack of control. It's very scary. But on the other hand, there's a lot of life that is not in our control. And the better that we can have the self-knowledge to know what we can control and drive and design, amazing, but also allow ourselves to let go and let the serendipity arrive, let the creativity or impulsivity, or let this kind of just magic goo of life that you can't predict and control kind of take you where it takes you. That's the major balancing act, especially, you know, for those of us who feel a lot of intense judgment, anxiety, fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you bringing up like that story that some of us might have learned or heard from like an art teacher, that made me think of, you know, when I was younger, I took piano lessons from when I was 9 until I was like 17. But my first teacher was like very by the book and very like critical, and like I wasn't allowed to make a mistake, or at least that's how I felt when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so that for a while was like ingrained in me, that like, you know, as I started to become more self-aware, I noticed anytime I would sit down, like all of the judgments that would already come up. And I think that, like you're saying, that place of judgment it makes it more difficult to really like fully experience and allow things to come out creatively. Exactly.
Here's another weird metaphor that I've never experimented with at all, but like, let's say you have oranges and you want to get the juice, and like, that's like the juice of life, let's say, of just like enjoying, not worrying, da 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 da. If your skin is so tight as that orange and so rigid and so self-protected and so afraid of judgment, you're not going to be able to slice through to open up and get to that delicious juice. If your rind is so tight, so to speak. None of that is to say that it's easy to loosen your rind. But awareness is obviously the first step. And for you to recognize, oh my God, when I sit down at the piano, my mind just floods with all these ways that I'm afraid of making a mistake. That tightness has to loosen a little bit for you to, first of all, play anything and enjoy it. But like, second of all, really like creativity can't flow when we're so tight and constricted in our relationship with ourselves. And so that awareness is a key first step. But then the second step is sort of the bravery of doing it anyway and being willing to find the places where we can soften a little bit and allow for more flow. You know, so maybe that's when you sit down at the piano, you remind yourself of those self-judgments, and you just hold yourself and breathe with them and try to relax. And then from that more relaxed vantage point, find a place to play on the piano. We're playing an instrument. It's play. It's not supposed to be like, bop, 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 but I think that we get so programmed into our desire to avoid losing control or avoid looking stupid or doing it wrong or whatever that we lose the juice. And it's so sad. And, again, it's not something that I walk around like I've completely mastered. It's a practice. It's a practice of continually looking at those layers and letting the walls come down as much as you can on any given, attempt.
Yeah. And I love how you describe that process of even just like pausing and taking some deep breaths to calm yourself in that moment.
Yeah. Because I do a lot of guided visualization and meditation with my clients because that's something that's always been helpful for me. And I've kind of naturally integrated it into my own process. And I find that it's the simplest tool, but it's like the hardest at the same time. It's free, it's not complicated, but it's very difficult of just letting yourself be with those difficult emotions or the part of you where that criticism is like lodged, and giving them the space to kind of unfold rather than sometimes our instinct is, nope, let's keep tight all around that. We're not going to let it out. We're not going to do this. We're going to play piano and we're going to be like just fine. We're going to seem like we're fine and we're going to keep going. Like that's where our values are. I think there's so much like desire to be perfect and not open up and expose something because we're in this, social media kind of obsessed culture where like the image is more important than the thing and the felt experience. But at the end of the day, we're left so like empty and still hungering for more because we're missing the juice. We're not really dropping fully in to our lives and into our felt experience and our bodies because we're so afraid of losing control.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's more about experiencing the process and what that, like you said, what that feels like, what that experience is like.
Yes, exactly. The process versus the product. And that was a huge thing, with art therapy and with sharing that ethos, undoing that framework that how something looks at the end of the day is more important than how much we enjoyed it, how messy our fingers got in the paint, or these things that like it's a shame. It's a shame. And there's a lot of misconceptions that, I often would tell people, I was an art therapist or I used to be an art therapist, whatever. And people go, oh, like you worked with kids. And it's like that it makes sense that people have that misconception. And of course, art therapy is great with kids. But I actually think that the most need is with adults who really lose that connection to play and imagination and kids don't have as many rules for how the world has to be and, afraid of looking stupid or breaking a rule. And so many adults could benefit from letting themselves break some of the rules that they've absorbed over the course of their lives.
Yeah, I think it's that idea, like it's more acceptable for children to like play and like figuratively like color outside the lines. Right. Versus adults where there's like all of these expectations and pressures. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely, I've always been sort of like a rule breaker, bender, kind of paved my own way. And, sometimes you get slapped down for that and that's very uncomfortable. But on the other hand, I think that like we can all benefit as individuals and as society when each person is empowered within their own body to do what's right for them rather than following the crowd and doing something that doesn't actually fit or feels yucky in their skin, because it's like, well, so and so did it this way, so I guess I have to do it this way. And we're very social animals. We've evolved to prioritize belonging in a group. And that's great. That has its benefits. But sometimes we have to break away from that to really find out what's true for us and then live from that more aligned place. Because when we live from that more aligned place, we're happier, things are flowing more easily, and we have more love to give ourselves. We have more love to show up with in all the contexts that we operate in. And I'm on my like soapbox about how much better the world would be if everyone like really deeply met their own needs. But I believe it so wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, on your journey, reaching a place of burnout. And that was kind of like your rock bottom, and then coming back from there.
Yeah.
How did you know that you were in that space, and how did you get out of there?
Yeah. So fortunately or unfortunately, I knew I was there because I've been there many, many, many times. I struggled with depression, anxiety since I was like 13, and, had sort of coming and going and worsening depression since that age. And so I knew it quite well to be in that rock bottom state. And the more that I wasn't looking inward at what makes me tick, what makes me happy, like every time I pursued a path, because it was like, oh, well, I'll go into the film industry because, my dad thinks that that's something that I would like. I go down that path, and then I get to the end of that and I go, oh, I'm not happy. And then, okay, I'm going to do this. And you get to the end of that path. And because you're chasing something that's like outside of yourself. Again, this is all realized in retrospect, of course. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I had hit different points with varying levels of, self-hatred, suicidal ideation, just, these intense symptoms of depression. I was very familiar with that territory. So I knew, oh, okay, I'm getting pretty specific about my suicide plan. Like, that's a bad sign. Yeah. So, I knew it as someone who experienced it chronically, but I also knew it now from the standpoint of a clinician, Mm-hmm. Now I can go, oh, if my client was telling me X, Y, and Z, I would be implementing this plan with them and treating them this way. And I was like not showing up for myself in the same way that I was taught to show up for people who were suffering with what I was suffering with. I was continually falling into the pattern of pushing my feelings away, not thinking that they were worth attending to or that they weren't even valid. And that's all stuff that I've since learned, was true of my childhood. And it's those habits and patterns that are baked in from a young age. So it's hard, though, to get to that point where you're not just subject to them, but you actually use them as a pivot point to start doing things differently. And so for me, I had hit this new bottom level where I felt like, oh, I always thought that finding the perfect career was going to be the thing that saved me or, gave me my happily ever after, whatever. And I got that. I got to the top of that ladder and was like, oh no, like none of what was promised is here. So I knew I had to really like reevaluate and make a decision not for what fulfills my career purpose, but more just like what brings me joy. And the decision to move to LA was largely based on sunshine, being near the beach, and just being in a culture that was more about holistic well-being. So I was living in New York before, as I said, and the vibe of that place is very much like focused career advancement, like you're it's very competitive. Not that Los Angeles is like full of a bunch of like people who don't care about those things. But I just found that I needed to do something to shift my environment. And I didn't really know much beyond that. It wasn't, I didn't have the whole thing planned out. I just packed my car up and moved across the country, and for the first time ever, didn't have a career plan. I just was trying to find joy. And yeah, I let myself just fly by the seat of my pants for the first time, and ended up finding all the right things, you know?
Yeah, so it sounds like you knew what you were doing wasn't working. And I definitely hear you with like the New York culture, because I live in New Jersey in the suburbs of Manhattan.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's definitely like that grind here and that like pressure that like, you know, to be always thinking of the next thing, like rushing, like, and then also the focus on, you know, your career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I still, you know, I still have to slow myself down and stop myself. Because, you know, it's not like I'm a monk at the top of a mountain where nothing gets to me. But I remember what it felt like to be at that bottom point, and I'm catching myself a lot quicker, and I'm reminding myself that it's more important to restore my emotional balance and reconnect to fun and play and levity than it is to beat my head against the wall to try to make something happen for my ego.
Yeah, so it sounds like that shift was from doing things for other people and, you know, for external expectations to then like actually reflecting on what did you want?
Right. And it takes a lot of bravery and a lot of like giving yourself the space to just let answers arrive and not kind of forcing yourself down certain paths. But yeah, when you don't know what you want, it's easy to just kind of listen to someone else and let them tell you and go, oh, maybe, yeah, sure, I'll try. And sometimes that can work, you know, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And what would you suggest, let's say, for somebody who might be in that space of like not knowing what they want or struggling with anxiety and depression?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I would suggest is find a time, a day, a weekend, something, and clear your schedule. Like, make yourself be with yourself and try as hard as you can not to let other things kind of fill that time. And the bigger, like, yes, half the battle is, okay, I have to tell this person no, but half the battle is actually getting yourself to just sit and be with yourself, and get just as big and as blank of a piece of paper as you can, and just start listing things that you like. List qualities in yourself that you really identify with. List things that spark excitement for you, big, small. Try not to filter yourself. See if you see a pattern. And again, it's like I can list it out like that and make it sound easy, but it really is. A lot of people really struggle to kind of just put the brakes on, like, all the things that are vying for our attention all the time, whether it's socially, in terms of our career, family, you know, whatever, because we have so many things vying for our attention right now. And again, when we don't know what we want, it's easy to kind of just keep giving it away, keep giving our attention away, but really reclaiming it for ourselves so that we can kind of get to the bottom of, well, what's authentically me, and kind of tease apart what's someone else, what's this other obligation versus like what's in my heart, what's in my soul. That's the best guidance I can give. And that's been something where I've had that soul searching time for myself at all these pivotal moments. And that's led me to kind of the next thing and the next thing. Because really restoring that relationship with your own inner compass is going to give you all the guidance you need for the rest of your life on any question you might want to ask. If you can just get yourself kind of calmed down and connect to that core voice inside of you, you can unlock any answers that you could possibly want. But you've got to differentiate, like, what's the anxiety? What's the thing that one person told me that one time? And what's really like resounding in my heart?
Yeah, I love that process that you mentioned of creating that space for yourself. And as you were describing that, it made me think of this quote by an author, Greg McKeown. He wrote the book Essentialism, and
yes,
it's this quote of like, when you don't prioritize your life, then somebody else will. Essentially, yes. Like you said, there's all these things vying for our attention, and it's easy to get swept up in like other people's priorities and then forget about our own.
100%. And God, I love that book so much. I'm so glad that you brought it up. Like, that book taught me a lot of like these really interesting core principles about how to even do that work, and like the way that he kind of defines like what is a priority, and really like explains that, you know, he did a lot of like corporate consulting and stuff. So a lot of the book is like written from that angle of like what works for a company. But of course it's generalizable to the self. But like he would go into these companies and they'd be like, all right, we have these 18 priorities. And it's like, no, the definition of priority is like, what is the one most important thing? You can't have 18 priorities or else nothing is a priority. And we are so like consumed by trying to multitask and do everything that we end up doing nothing meaningful. We end up spreading ourselves so thin that it's like 100% of us isn't anywhere at any given time.
Yeah.
And we have to do the hard work of like literally like drawing our energies back into ourselves.
So what does that process consist of? I know you had mentioned somebody like writing down those things of like, what is it that they enjoy, or
there's a lot of ways to approach this. And that's like the beauty of just creativity, is like anyone can start with the intention of, I want to get to the bottom of what is me. And you could get out, paint, you could dance, you could journal, or you could just sit quietly and kind of watch your thought processes. There's so many ways to uncover yourself. And what I would say is look for the ones that give you that little like, ooh, that spark of curiosity, and let yourself just follow what is calling to you. And if nothing's calling to you, then, you know, start somewhere, start with something, and see if you can hear those little whispers of like, I want to blah, blah, blah. Maybe it sounds like a child even, you know, because we all have these undeveloped inner child pieces and parts of us, these like fragments of us at different ages that have different wounds, or different things that we were excited and curious about that were shut down by like an adult in our life or whatever. And so the more that we can just go inward, you know, it could start with just closing your eyes and feeling your feet on the floor and breathing and just seeing what arises. There's no right or wrong way to do it, as long as the focus keeps coming back to what's true for me. It takes practice. It takes some time to redevelop that relationship with ourselves and to weed out the voices that aren't ours. And really to kind of, I talk a lot about how we really need to reestablish this connection and relationship with our own bodies, because it's been so disconnected that we have to wait and be patient and let our body speak to us again, and then kind of trust it and give it the green light, or else it's going to kind of like, it's like its own little sensitive creature where it recoils and won't give you information if you're always kind of shutting it down.
Yeah. So I like how you're talking about like integrating the body and just allowing it to do what comes up. And what about somebody who's like, is in that place of like rigidity, and they're like maybe fearful of like, well, you know, I could imagine somebody getting stuck in that place of perfectionism. Like, well, what do I do? How do I start? What's the right thing to do?
Yeah. I mean, so the other element that I haven't really focused on, because I always like to advocate for, anyone can do this work within themselves at any time. And that's 100% true. However, it's so potent to do this work, potentially initially at least, with someone else who can hold the space for them, who can continually kind of redirect them to, well, it sounds like, you're saying this, but earlier I saw you get really excited when you talked about X, Y, or Z. So like someone else who's kind of like almost like the bumpers on a bowling lane, where it's like, instead of just throwing the ball down and watching it go down the same gutter it always goes down, of like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to get it right, I don't know where to start, I'm paralyzed. Someone else can help remind you, that's just a thought pattern that you're having. Mm-hmm. Let's see what's beneath that. And I also always like to kind of tie what I'm saying into like what's true of our species, and what are the evolutionary forces that we're fighting against to do this, because I think it gives a little bit of validation to just like how hard it is to go against these patterns. But like, we evolved together, we evolved to be a part of a tribe and to be in small, intimate, collaborative, cooperative societies. And so there's this misgiving in our current culture that's so individualized that we have to do it all ourselves. And if we can't, we're failures. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that was never the expectation as we were developing into the species that we are today. We had elders and, supportive families and peers. And, we had all these people who were guiding us and supporting us and helping us. And now I think we really fall into this, the expectation that we're supposed to do it all ourselves, and that if we can't, we're broken. It's like, no, our society has kind of morphed into something that makes us feel broken. But we need to just touch back in with having faith that we can do it, getting support where we need it, instead of feeling like, if I need help, that means I'm less than, I'm weak, I'm this, I'm that. But yeah, those ideas are really baked in, so it's hard. So to go back to your question about specifically someone who's really struggling with perfectionism, and maybe that perfectionism is keeping them from even choosing a vehicle to explore themselves through. We can get so caught up in making sure we do it the right way that we never do anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's again that awareness that you get first of like, I'm noticing that I'm having this perfectionistic tendency. What else can I try? What else is true for me? Yes, it's very hard to step out of that. And I get nervous when I think about choosing one path, because what if it's not the right path? But let me just almost imagine lifting that perfectionistic part of my mind out of my head, and I put it over here in a jar, and that jar is going to sit here on the shelf while I go forward and just try something and let myself play. And when I hear it pipe up, I remember, okay, nope, that goes in the jar. I'm going to be over here doing my own thing. And I can put that jar back anytime I want, but let me give myself some space from that and see what happens.
I love that visualization of like taking it out and then moving forward without it, kind of.
Yeah. And again, like I love the visuals and the stuff and the metaphors and all of that, because it makes it tangible, it makes it sticky, and it just enhances that network of connections where someone might remember, oh yeah, the perfectionism jar, and that might help them disidentify and separate themselves from that voice that feels like it's a inescapable part of them, when really it's like, okay, it's something we might want a little more distance from, instead of automatically assuming that it's who will be forever, even if, so I'm kind of in this process right now of like, I've struggled with depression since I was 13. I still struggle with it from time to time, but I've gained so much knowledge and experience and ability to manage it that I'm realizing, wow, there are a lot of ways even still that I identify with my depression, or I just consider myself automatically as, well, I'm this depressed person who ... Instead of going like, okay, sometimes I get depressed, but I don't have to confuse a thought or an emotion with who I am.
Mm.
And so if you're listening to this thinking about how many times have I said, yeah, I'm a perfectionist, or I'm OCD, or I'm anxious, I'm an anxious person, whatever. Every time we kind of remind ourselves of that or choose to identify with that, we're blurring the line of like, you can choose not to be that in some moments. You can, if it's something that you don't like, doesn't fit with you, doesn't actually serve you on the day-to-day to identify as a perfectionist, try not using that language. Ask yourself, what would I like to be instead? If I were to introduce myself to someone, I wouldn't be like, hi, I'm Morgan, I'm a perfectionist. It's just, what is an alternative? Explore what that might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I think that labels can be helpful in some sense, to help you to understand yourself more. And at the same time, they can also be confining and sometimes keep you in this box of like, this is who I am and this is the only way that I am, or, I'm never going to change.
And so I want to encourage people to notice when they use that language. I'm always going to be this. I'm never going to be this. This very like black and white, always, never, all, none, black and white thinking. If you hear yourself make a statement that includes that language, that's a really good, like, see a red flag, see red lights blinking of like, beep, 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 beep. Wait a minute. This is something to pay attention to. We're probably afraid of something. We're probably defending against something where it's scarier to admit, oh, there's nuance to this. Like, sometimes I'm a perfectionist, but sometimes I really just care about how things look because I'm scared of not being good enough. Okay, what does that mean? What's the emotion there that I need to kind of sit with and commune with a little bit? There are all these different things that we can become aware of. And then once we have that awareness, that's when we have the chance to get off of autopilot and retake that seat of, let me steer this ship or plane or whatever vehicle we're the pilot of, in the direction of where I really want to go.
Yeah. And so it sounds like you're starting with what is the kind of language that somebody is using, and then like what's underneath that? Like, what are the emotions? What other thoughts are there? What are the beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Everything in our internal world and external world, respectively, is like a mirror. And anything can trigger that moment of awareness and mindfulness of like, well, wait a minute, how is this revealing the cage I've put myself in? And it's about having that moment of mindfulness and then not shaming yourself immediately for, oh no, I did it again. I used the word always. So like, you don't want to get in that trap. It's more about changing the attitude that you meet that with. Oh, okay, I recognize I'm using that black and white language. What does that mean? How can I find compassion for myself in that moment? How can I find a more truthful statement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, like doing that reframe. And to tie it back to the creativity, like, how do you notice that, once somebody's gotten to the point where they're like getting things out creatively and they're starting to maybe understand more about themselves or, what's coming out, what have you noticed happens like from or during that process?
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that I want to say that's so important and may seem like an add-on, but is actually like so key, is when someone starts to notice themselves shifting and changing and doing something in a new way, that's a moment where you want to step back and be like, oh my God, I'm doing it. This is amazing. And really celebrating yourself and not just going, all right, check, what's my next imperfection to get rid of, you know? So really celebrating your growth, that's a huge part. Anytime you get that a little awareness of, wow, I'm doing this differently, celebrate yourself. Take a pause, really feel how it feels to feel proud, to feel excited, to feel optimistic, giving those emotions as much space as we tend to give the negative stuff, because we already have this negativity bias where we're more fixated on what's wrong than what's right. So that's one thing. And then really holding people accountable to what they're discovering about themselves and sort of putting pins in and underscoring, like, you're doing it. I see you doing this. I see you doing that. And other people can also do sometimes a better job of producing an unbiased reflection than we do ourselves. So, I'll have clients who I've seen make tremendous progress, and they acknowledge that they've made tremendous progress, and still will say, I'm always like this. I'm never like this. So that's where it's helpful to have that other person remind them, I hear you saying that. I hear that that's coming from the feeling you're having right now of being discouraged. But I've also seen you do X, Y, and Z. And then it's like, yeah, you're right. And we can do that for ourselves. We can look through old journal entries. We can remind ourselves, well, where was I a year ago? Sometimes it can be hard to see really incremental, gradual progress. But like, if you're really struggling with where you are right now, think about who you were 5 years ago or a year ago and just be like, what's different? What have I learned? In what ways have I grown? That can be a really powerful way to kind of shift your perspective. Is there any specific other feature of that question that you wanted me to touch on in terms of like what happens once someone starts unfolding their creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you focused on was great, like that importance of focusing on that growth and what's going well, because I think that can be easy to overlook a lot of times. And like you mentioned, not seeing the progress or the gradual change that can be made. And I guess another part of that question would be, how does somebody, and maybe this isn't something you can necessarily directly answer, but like, how does somebody interpret, like they're getting stuff out, and like, how does art interpret to this is what I want when it's something that may be like more abstract?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say that is a good question. And it is kind of hard to answer it really without like a concrete example of like a person sitting in front of me. But I think some of what's happening as the creativity is unfolding is just like the layers are going away and they can have a more unfiltered, direct connection to what they really want as more things are kind of getting discharged. But also there are definitely things, and I think they're more easy to identify when it's written, because then it's very clear language. Like, I really love what you're writing. You're writing in your journal and you're like talking about your priorities and your values and this and that. And then you can look back and go, oh, I wrote a lot about people. And so maybe what I really want is to interact with people more. I want to broaden my social circles, or I want to do a job where I'm interacting with people more. But, if you're making a piece of art, it's not like you're necessarily going to be like, oh my God, I've painted all these people. That must mean I have to work with people. It might not be that clear. So it would really be a matter of kind of observing the patterns, and doing it over time, and not going, oh, I made this one painting and it didn't solve my life, so I'll never paint again. It's going through the process of buying into allowing your creativity to flourish, allowing yourself to play, it kind of opens that window into just being a more playful person, saying yes to yourself more. And then you start to notice and entertain, I think, more when you get little impulses, when you do other things throughout the day. You might realize, oh, I'm excited to, do this certain task or whatever. And before you started to allow yourself to express ideas and buy into them enough to put them on paper, you might have dismissed that impulse, not noticed it at all, kind of shot it down before it even got out of the gate, so to speak. So that's one thing I definitely do with clients, is like that empowerment piece, like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation with creativity. That's so important, because once you feel like you can actually bite down on like the fact that you have answers, you have ideas that are worth exploring, your impulses aren't something you should immediately throw in the garbage because they won't work out. That's when you start to notice and apply like that lens to the rest of your life. It might come as you start to be more honest with yourself about the things you don't like about your job. It might come in the form of you realize there's a friendship you don't like. And so a lot of it also is like identifying the things that don't fit. And then if you're brave enough to turn the volume down on those things and devote less of your time and space to those things, it opens up more time and space to discover what comes to you. Like I was saying, when I moved to Los Angeles, the biggest blessing was not having a plan. Because if I had a plan, like I tried to apply to several jobs before I left and they didn't work out. And I was so bummed, thinking like, oh God, no one wants me to work for them. I'm going to move out to LA and I'm going to just flounder. But it's like having that empty space was what allowed the right things to magnetize toward me. And if you, this is a tough one, because I have a lot of clients who want to make a career transition. They're stuck in a toxic job, and I try to explain to them the benefit of quitting the job first before getting something else in place. Because if you're sitting there and you're undergoing the toxicity of a boss that doesn't like you, a job where you feel worthless, how are you going to apply and feel worthy of something you might really want when you're kind of in this like blah space? Heal what's going on here, get out of that situation, and then see what ignites that excitement. It's going to be harder to get ignited or excited when your world is this gray cloud of like, I think I'm crap. So I think that a lot of the benefit of the creativity starting to open up is you get that empowerment piece. You're making that connection that something outside of me can get put on paper. And then you're clearing space and you're sharpening that lens to see your environment differently, so that then you can take out and reconsider the things that aren't really serving you and start looking differently and more optimistically at the things that might serve you.
Yeah, I love how you describe that. And it sounds like it's that process of kind of what you were saying earlier, of getting to know yourself and, creating that space so that you can learn how to listen to and express what's coming up for you, what your desires are.
Yeah. But yeah, like when you have that desire to be in control or keep yourself busy so that you don't have to deal with the thoughts in your head or a feeling of emptiness, it's very hard to value nothing over something, even if the something isn't working.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like it's all, being comfortable with getting in that place of discomfort where there is that, lack of busyness or space. And that I think can be counterintuitive for a lot of people. Right.
And their fears come up of like, well, if I let go of this, what if I change my mind and I'm missing it? And, then I've let go of it. And I think that it's important to, again, kind of note like, okay, what's that voice coming from? Is that you, or is that just that fear of maybe something that's happened to you before, where you have an abandonment fear, you have a, the control piece. So it's, again, it's simple, but very difficult. And that's why I really think that if you are in a position to get help and get support in going through this process, it makes it a lot easier and a lot faster, but also sometimes it's the only thing that kickstarts it to begin with.
Yeah, I agree. And this was such an interesting conversation. I feel like I could go on talking to you about this forever. But is there any like last thoughts that you have that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. I totally agree that we could talk about this forever, and it's been such a pleasure. And just because it's occurring to me, I'd like to leave them with one other little tool that they can use, which is sort of a guided meditation visualization tool. If you're having trouble seeing outside of kind of a negative framework, try getting into a comfortable place, sitting, lying down, whatever feels good to you, and closing your eyes. And instead of just trying to tune into like nothing, imagine yourself surrounded by an orb of light. Whatever color light, whatever temperature of light just feels good to you, feels pleasant, pleasurable, relaxing, restorative, whatever kind of vibe you want to move towards. Imagine yourself just surrounded, like almost like your aura was just oozing this color, this intensity of light, this quality of light. And then just see yourself breathing it in and see it absorbing through your skin, just bringing up that visual of yourself surrounded by this goodness, surrounded by whatever it is you need. And just trust that bringing that in and bathing in it can actually change your state of mind, your state physically. Experiment with that and see what it feels like to just soak that in, swim in it, bask in it, and imagine it penetrating all of your cells and tissues and organs and going to all the places where you need that feeling most. And once it fills you completely, taking as long as you need to really absorb it, imagine that everywhere you go, you're spreading this goodness, that you're now this vehicle or this engine of that feeling, and you can share it with your environment, anyone you're around, and you can awaken it within you anytime you want.
I was doing that as you were saying it. That was a great
exercise.
I
loved it. I opened my eyes and I was like, great, she's doing it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can make that up as you go along. You can, whatever you want and need, you can kind of create it and craft it. But sometimes just, again, having someone tell you, yeah, this is legit. So take the time, do it. You can shift how you're feeling. You can give yourself anything that you need. You can get any of the answers you need just by going in yourself. Sometimes just can help be that little extra bit of support you can rest on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, thank you so much. Can you let people know where they can find you and learn more about you?
Absolutely. So the best place to just sort of the hub for all the ways that you can connect with me, or if you want to contact me directly, is going to my website at morganbeard.coach, morganbeard.coach. COACH. I don't normally spell the word coach.
I'll also leave it in the description.
Yeah. So, you can email me, you can reach out, you can book a strategy call, you can, learn more. I have some tools and some exercises and some videos and stuff. Yeah. And if any of this stuff resonates with you or you have any other questions, please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would love to help guide you through your practice, and clear up anything that, is an obstacle for you to being that version of yourself that you want to be.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.